All right, hey, so we are starting a podcast, the Canyon Chasers podcast, and we're going to bring in Alex and May. Alex works for Yamaha Champions School. May is the better half of Alex and also a very accomplished rider on her own. And welcome to the hallowed halls of Canyon Chasers. I know for a lot of people when they walk in here, it's an emotional experience. It's like, you get kind of like teared up. Is that?
Well, you can smell Ducati.
You can smell Ducati. Yeah.
And KTM.
So we need to come up with a name for this podcast, right? Like, I had a couple ideas. I was thinking like maybe In the Clutch, and you had a couple ideas.
I don't remember them.
I think you were saying Between Two Bikes.
Between Two Bikes.
Kind of like Between Two Ferns.
Yes.
But I think we should put it out to our listeners if they have a better idea for the name of the podcast, because I think Canyon Chasers, the podcast, is a little weak, even though it does work for SEO, right? Like search engine optimization. Yeah. So since it is the beginning podcast, the very first episode, we're going to talk about beginner riders. So why don't we start off? Why don't we talk, like, introduce yourself? So they probably all know me, but they don't know you, and we can how did you get started riding?
Sure. So my name's Alex. I work for the Yamaha Champions Riding School. I'm the Champ U program manager. So if you guys have heard of Champ U, that's kind of my baby. Got started riding after I got out of the Army. So I got out in 2016, finished my undergrad, got accepted to law school, and went, I need a better way to get downtown faster and save money in the process. So I'm going to switch to motorcycles to save money. Worked out tremendously.
It never works out, right? Like, as soon as you start looking at the price of tires, you're like, oh
no.
No, so like I did the math, right? So at the point we had a big lifted Jeep and a Ford Raptor, and I was getting like 14 miles a gallon between the two of them. And so both vehicles are on 37-inch tires, and I was going, okay, well, it costs $2,200 to change out these tires. It only costs like $350 to change out motorcycle tires. That's cool. Get 45, 50 miles a gallon on the motorcycle. Math worked out really, really well until I got a bike. Yep. At that point, everything kind of just went sideways. Actually, that's how my riding career really started, was by going sideways. About a week and a half after.
This is a great story. Like, I actually retell your story without ever identifying you all
creepy.
The time. No, because I think it really kind of underpins a lot of the things I was kind of hoping we could talk about today is that new rider experience. It's hard. I would hate to have to be a new rider again.
Oh, yeah.
So if like you wiped my memory and I had to start from the beginning, I don't know if I would be willing to embark on this. There's a lot of challenges the new rider has to face, and your story is like kind of a pinnacle example of one of those.
Right. And so, to kind of backstop the story a little bit, we were looking at some statistics internally over the last couple of weeks. We're preparing to do a presentation for the State Motorcycle Safety Association. And we're finding that, in 2019, the SMSA itself said that, something along the lines of 80% of riders that get licensed through a basic rider course never return or they leave the sport within 3 years.
They leave the sport. 80%.
80% of riders that get licensed
never
leave
come
the sport.
back.
Yep. And between 1% and 5% of riders that graduate a basic riding course ever come back for follow-on training. So with those statistics in mind, with my story, so I graduated top of the world. The instructors were like, hey, you're never going to have a problem. You're a great rider already, which they knew from me riding around the parking lot for 2 days at 18 miles an hour. So I go with some friends up the canyon, really tight, twisty road, super fun road, beautiful road. And log truck comes into my lane, one corner, I get a little spooked. One of the very next corner, tight decreasing radius corner, big deal as a new rider, right?
Oh yeah.
Especially when you're taught accelerate to stabilize the suspension and add more lean angle to correct the problem when you're going wide. So I'm running wide, I do exactly what I'm taught. I add throttle to stabilize my suspension, and I add lean angle to try to make the corner. I keep running wider, so I keep adding more throttle, thinking this is gonna help. Get to the edge of the roads, hit the gravel, end over end. Bike goes end over end. I remember flying through the air, which was actually kind of a cool feeling at that point, right until I landed and my helmet broke a rock about this size in half.
Incredible, yeah.
Yeah, I spent about the next 6 hours going, do I really want to be in this sport? Like, I just wrecked a brand new bike to me, just wrecked a helmet that I paid for. I've been in the sport less than a week. I should probably just quit now. Thankfully, I didn't quit. The couple I was riding with, they said, hey, you got to go to Champ School. I said, what the heck is Champ School? They kind of explained it to me. I went, okay, that's interesting. definitely need more education because what I was trained to do did not pay off in that situation.
It's funny, your story is so similar to mine, only happened at a dramatically different point in our riding career. Because I started to ride in the late 80s. There was no rider education.
I was born in the late 80s.
Yeah, it was that's how, So I was inspired by Top Gun, right? I was gonna ride my Ninja next to airplanes. That was gonna be my life goal. And we were in Laguna Seca. We went to Laguna Seca for MotoGP, and we went out for a little day ride, and we were on this little road in a downhill decreasing radius corner, right? And I went into it a little too quick, and I was like, well, we'll just lean more and stay on the gas, downhill decreasing radius, and I come around the corner, there's a Honda Civic coming up the other way, and I almost center punch, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
I survived that. And I remember walking out that evening going I think I'm done. This isn't fun for me. I'm not progressing. It's a horrible experience. And then a champ school instructor who was a friend of mine is so Dave, let me talk to you about this thing called trail braking. No, we never touch the front brake in a corner, right? But May, how did you, where's your beginning? We haven't given you much of an opportunity to speak.
That's okay, you guys like to talk. Totally fine.
So I gotta say before May talks, I'm gonna cut her off one more time. The reason why we're doing this is you were on speakerphone in the pickup truck and we were just chatting while you guys were driving someplace, and May pipes up and goes, I feel like I'm listening to a really interesting motorcycle podcast. Yeah. And I was like, well, let's do that. So anyway, we got to give credit to May. It was her idea. But how did you get into riding?
Him. So I, like a lot of other people, had a really low opinion of motorcycles. My aunt was in a car accident or a motorcycle accident when she was young, shattered her hip, completely changed her life. I swore up and down, never be on the back of a bike, ever. Whether I'm riding or passenger, never. Never, ever, ever. So when he started riding, I was like, okay, fine, that's your thing, you go do it, that's your time. I don't want to be a part of it, just come home. And he literally pushed me to do it. He's like, you know what? I think you're gonna love this. Just do it, just try it, do the new rider course, see how you feel. I think you'll really enjoy it. And so I did for him, and
you liked it?
It hooked me.
You liked it?
Yeah, the freedom. I can't explain what it feels like being on a motorcycle. You're so free.
And it's interesting too, you're former military, I'm former military, and the connection between veterans getting onto motorcycles is significant. A huge percentage of veterans get on motorcycles for that kind of, I'm doing something, I'm not just sitting here, I'm moving through the world, but there's this catharsis.
Yeah. Well, really. You can't think of anything else.
Yeah.
So when you're riding, you have to be so focused on what you're doing, and you can't think. So all the experiences you had in the past, everything that bothers you, it's gone in those moments.
Because you have to be in the moment. You have to be in the moment, or you're not going to do this sport for very long.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know she noticed a difference in my personality, once I started riding, right? So, I spent about 10 years in the Army, a couple deployments to Afghanistan, infantrymen, sniper sections, that whole gamut. Lots of armed hiking. And I came back with some scars, visible and invisible. And motorcycling to me, started off as, hey, let's save some money. Ended up being, wow, this requires 100% of my focus. All those voices, all those demons are suddenly quiet. This is amazing. I'm going to keep doing this. And I know you noticed a difference pretty early on. And that's one of the things that I really want to get across to other veterans. Is one of the reasons I'm still in the sport and still trying to progress in the sport is the better you get at the sport, the more focus you put into it, kind of the easier life becomes. You can start setting aside your past and remembering what you need to remember, but kind of getting over some things with no medication, no side effects other than your wallet.
It's not the cheapest sport. Yeah.
No, it's not the cheapest sport, but in terms of bang for your buck for effectively PTSD treatment, I've never found anything better. Sure, you can go ride horses, you can go fly fishing, go do whatever you want, but none of those other things have that adrenaline rush, right? You don't get that shot of adrenaline that you had the last time you were shot at. You don't get that, oh man, I need to be focused right now or I could die. Because very realistically, that is possible on a motorcycle. So it demands your focus, it demands your attention. It does all these things for you that really the last time you had was in combat.
So, and that's kind of a funny thing too, right? So choppers, and cafe racers are both a result of veterans. Post-World War II, veterans would come home from the military, right? They would pick up the old military WLA Harleys and chop all the crap off of them and just go for rides. That's where the chopper came from. Whereas in Europe, right, where the roads are smaller and tighter and twistier, they would do the same thing, only they would race from cafe to cafe or try to go out and back before a song ended on the jukebox, cafe racer.
Nice.
So a lot of modern motorcycles really do kind of come from, and military is steeped in tradition just as badly as motorcycles are. And I'm not a fan of tradition. I'm really, but you ever do the personality test in the Army? They did one for me, and it was the end result, like you get all these, like you like this or you like that or whatever, and it was not impressed with tradition was one of the things they said about me.
The only personality test I remember in the Army was like, how much can you suffer?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of that. Yeah, it is like the pain cave. How deep are you willing to go into the pain cave, right?
Yeah, but no, it's interesting, right? It's like the military, and tradition and stuff, and we run into problems of tradition in the military. Like for whatever reason, my unit decided to do a white glove inspection in the rain in Kandahar.
Oh, right on. Yeah. I remember getting smoked for having muddy boots in Bosnia.
Yeah. And so we see that, the one phrase that got me in trouble often was, excuses, tradition is just an excuse to do the same thing over and over and over again, right? Officers didn't like that. Neither did senior NCOs for that matter. And turns out neither do motorcyclists.
No, it's a huge problem we face as motorcyclists. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, that, we get caught up in, well, this is the way it's been, this is the way we were doing it in the 70s, or this is the way I've been doing it for 40 years.
Right.
And tradition doesn't necessarily, when tradition no longer serves a purpose, then why do we hang on to it?
Right. If it's a German beer that's been brewed the same way since the 1400s, absolutely, that's a tradition
I'm with you.
You should keep.
Right, whiskey. I'm a whiskey man, right?
Yep.
So,
like back in the day, right? Have the kid in the front seat with the airbag.
Yeah.
Well, we figured out that was not a good tradition.
So you're younger than I am. I remember laying in the back window of the sedan watching the stars as Dad drove. Like not even in a seat, laying in the shelf in the
For
back
your
window.
generation, that was kind of the tradition, right?
It's great.
'Cause everybody did that.
Yeah.
And then science went, hey, that's probably not a good idea. And we kind of advanced beyond that.
Well, and there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of pain in that.
Pain.
And, like motorcycles does that too, right? Like there's new concepts that we're introducing all the time that aren't necessarily new, but they go counter to a lot of tradition, which kind of brings me to like one of the things I was wanting to talk about today is some of the challenges new riders face. And I think tradition and, these guys say this and these guys say that. How does a new rider navigate that?
That's hard because you're looking at, there's so many sources of information, whether it's, your basic rider instructor, personalities on YouTube, like there's just so much information. Reddit, right?
Oh, Reddit.
You go on Reddit, you ask a question, hey, what's 2 + 2? You'll get 16 answers that say it's 15 for whatever reason.
I swear on Reddit, if Champ School were to get up there and make a video about how you twist the throttle towards you to go faster, there would be people who would argue about how that is wrong.
Would not be surprised.
Yeah. I wouldn't, it's amazing the concepts that are brought up on Reddit and the arguments to counter that.
And like we're on Reddit, right? And our purpose there is not advertising. Like we've been reported and I've had to talk to mods about it. Like, no, we're not there to advertise. We're literally just trying to help you guys be safer. And one of the problems we run into, especially on places like Reddit, is you'll get a lot of, armchair physicists.
A lot of that. A lot of center of gravity. There's a big obsession with center of gravity.
Yeah, and so two things. One, always vet your sources. So if dude's online using handle track day doctor, right? Is he using his name or is he using a handle? If he's using his name, there's a decent chance that he cares enough about his own self-respect and self-esteem that he's not going to be giving out trash information.
Yeah, because he's putting his own name, his own reputation on the line, as opposed to the track day doctor or, whatever.
Whoever
I was trying to think
of
of the one from the Thor movie, Noob Master 77, right?
Yeah, so vet your sources, right? What's the guy's background? If he's giving physics advice, is he a physicist? What's his degree in? When did he get his degree? Where did he get his degree from? If he's got a degree in underwater basket weaving, why is he handing out physics advice? And the other thing is look for the term best practices. So best practices is kind of the antithesis of tradition, right? Best practices is, hey, what are the best in the world doing at this thing? So whether it's motorcycling, whether it's underwater basket weaving, shooting, whatever else, what are the best in the world doing? And are those results they're using measurable? Because that's how we figure out what they are doing. That's how you figure out who the best in the world are. So like coming from a shooting background, competition really drives excellence. So our best practices come from the competition shooting world. Like even as a sniper, we would send guys out to competitions. We would have internal competitions. I competed at the International Sniper Competition in 2015. Snipers from around the world would get together. We would literally turn it into a laboratory of what is best practices, what is working best. Because we had 30 different teams from around the world doing the exact same thing. Who did it best? What were they doing differently? That's how you figure out what are best practices, because the results are measurable. So in motorcycling, the only place we have measurable results is racing. Mm-hmm. And you might think, oh, well, that's racing, they're different. Those tracks are different, they're perfect, and their tires are perfect and all this. The reality is no. The motorcycle doesn't know, and it doesn't care what pavement it's on. It doesn't know if it's at, Laguna Seca. It doesn't know if it's downtown Salt Lake City. Doesn't know if it's in the canyons here. Doesn't know if it's at Portimao. Right?
Well, and people need to understand that a racetrack is not a controlled environment. It is a closed course. Yes. That is an important distinction. I think all of us need to pay attention to racing. Yes, we don't ride on the street like you do on a racetrack. You don't ride at that pace. There's more variables. But
we do ride on the street like we do on a racetrack in terms of technique.
Yes, exactly. But not the pace.
Speed.
Exactly.
Well, and here's the other thing. So think about it. Who develops these new bikes? It's the racers. So if the racers are the ones who are giving the inputs, and that's what the engineering is taking and putting into a brand new bike, what you did last year might not work on that bike because that bike was engineered differently. And that's what the racers are doing. So why not watch the racers?
Yeah, well, and it's something that Champ School says all the time, and I stole it. But like when the pace comes up or grip goes down, it's the same thing, right? Because we're at the limits of what we are capable of in that moment.
Right.
So the techniques that work when the pace is up or when the grip is down are the same things because the consequences are kind of the same, right? Like we have to load the tire before we work the tire. We can't just it's one thing in a parking lot. And I really think a lot of people put too much emphasis on parking lots. We're not dying in parking lots. You can get away with a lot of stupid stuff in parking lots. You can grab the brake, whatever, you're in a parking lot.
Yep.
But now let's go at speed and grab the brake. Now let's go to a low grip environment and grab the brake.
Right, and there's, parking lot, there's so much mechanical grip, right? There really aren't a whole lot of forces, well, same forces, but different levels of those forces acting on you. You don't have the inertia, you don't have the momentum that you're trying to overcome when you're trying to.
Yeah, the centrifugal forces, and there's way more than center of gravity.
Yeah,
folks, I'm telling you, way more than center of gravity.
There's so much going on to the point that, to this day, I've actually called physics departments at various universities around the country. I spent 2 days calling around to different physics departments, going, "Please explain how a motorcycle works." Hey, we don't know.
Well, there's a wonderful book.
We have a pretty good idea, but we don't know.
There is a wonderful book, and I pimp it all the time, Motorcycle Dynamics, written by an Italian guy.
I tried reading it.
It is so dense. It is so dense. But it is
so
fascinating. So am I, right, yeah. It takes a lot. I have to really, but it's, there is a lot we don't know. There's a lot of things we don't necessarily, people say, oh, it's the gyroscopic forces. Well, they've built bicycles that eliminate the gyroscopic forces and it's still stable. There's a lot of things we don't know, but because of data analytics and racing and potentiometers and data acquisition, we know an incredible more. We know way more now than we did in the 70s.
And even not just how the physics work on the back end, because realistically, Marc Marquez, Fabio, none of those guys go down the front straight going, well, if force equals mass times acceleration, I need to be,
what's my mu on the tire versus
right, exactly. Nobody does that.
Right.
They go to the brakes when they're nervous, and they stay with the brakes till they're happy with their speed and direction, right? That's what they care about. What is the front end telling me? So really, they care more about their technique and the feedback from what the bike is giving them. And if their technique isn't right on the bike, they're never going to get that feedback. Right. They're never going to be pushing those lap times, much less the consistency. Over the course of a MotoGP race, what do they lose, 30 pounds worth of fuel? Not to mention the tires get shagged over the course of the race. The whole dynamic of the bike changes, right? But they're still running within tenths of their original lap.
Yeah, they have to be adaptable. And because it is measured, we can see by looking at the riders who are fast and don't crash, we can see what works. And then we kind of almost go at it backwards. There was an interview with Randy Momola, and he was talking about Fabio Quartararo, who is arguably on probably the worst bike on the paddock. We're getting a little off topic here, but this is fascinating.
A little bit.
But like, he's talking about Fabio Quartararo, who's arguably on probably one of the worst bikes on the MotoGP grid this year. Yet he's the points leader, and he's unbelievably consistent. And Momola was saying that we're looking at his data, and he's doing things that we've never seen anybody do before. Right. We don't know why we're trying to figure out what he's doing and how that's affecting the motorcycle and why that's making him so competitive on a non-competitive motorcycle.
Right.
Racing is our laboratory. Racing is the scientific evidence that a lot of people on Reddit say, well, where's your scientific proof? Well, we kind of have it. We don't have big, massive studies funded by universities to do this. We have racing.
Right.
And that's where we figure out.
And the beautiful thing about, racing is it's the same techniques to a different degree of application. And that's where best practices are formed, right? So if racing is the peak of our sport, if racing is we're going to push this bike, these tires to the 101% of what they're capable of, to find out where that limit is, that technique will work all the way down at 1%. Yeah, and you can work that, you have to work backwards, right? You have to work from the top down. You can't take something that only works in this very specific scenario at 10 miles an hour in a parking lot and go, cool, I'm gonna make it work at this pace, or I'm gonna make it work in these conditions over here.
That is such a profound point right there.
It's like perfect day, perfect tires.
Slow speed.
Tons
of grip.
We can do a lot. We can get away with a lot. But why would we practice things that only work in the perfect when nothing else in the world is perfect? So when we're on that canyon ride, all we've been doing is practicing that perfect day, right? When we go on that canyon ride, suddenly there's a snowstorm. What are you gonna do? Your tires are shagged. What are you gonna do? Car spun out. What are you gonna do? Gravel in your lane. Still. Some of those techniques that you may have been practicing will not work in those scenarios.
Right.
So why not start with best practices? Whatever degree of application you want, pace regardless, just use the technique, because they'll work at any pace in any condition.
Yeah, I get tired of, back to the topic we're trying to talk about, the advice that's always doled out that's, we'll just go slower. We'll just go slower.
You use
just
the right
slower.
word there, advice. There's a huge difference between advice and instruction.
Yes.
And if you're looking for advice on how to ride a motorcycle, you're using the wrong word.
Yep.
Look for instruction, because instruction requires research, requires curriculum, requires instructors, requires expertise, all these other things. I can give advice till I'm blue in the mouth. I can say, hey, look, you should peel an onion this way. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's the way I peel an onion.
Right. Well, and as, someone who's been teaching, you teach, right? How many times, does new information come out and you're like, oh, I need to adjust what I have been saying based on this new information, right?
Yeah, so I was talking to Nick Einach, our CEO, a couple months ago. We were talking about, one of the reasons I really actually went to Champ School after I was told about it was because Champ School is willing to be wrong, but will correct it as quickly as possible. So Nick wrote the Pace back in the day, and then he went, okay, people took this a little weird. I'm gonna write the Pace 2.0 and say, look, I was wrong. This is how it's supposed to work. And that to me was an amazing thing. Okay, cool, dude's willing to recognize that he was wrong, fix it, and put out best practices, right? Huge to me as a person. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about, how the school adjusts its curriculum as time goes on. I'll literally sit there. I've sat there at Indy Motorsports Ranch and watch the guys watching MotoGP, and they'll pause and go, I wonder why he's doing that. Let's look at that. So one of the stories Nick was telling me was, back in the day when Rossi started dangling his leg, everyone went, what the hell's he doing? So they literally took 2 days at, I forget what track it was, but they went out and tried it in every single corner, both sides of the bike. And they found okay, cool, it works in a couple places, don't really like it in these other places, but we think we know why he's doing it now. And of course, nobody ever tells you why they do something because they want that competitive edge, but they went out and tried it and added it to the curriculum.
Now everybody just about does it.
Yeah, well, and we understand where it works, right? It works like over the top of a hill to move the center of gravity.
Yep.
Yeah, want to weight down lower and further back into the inside. So
Right.
It's a good air brake too.
And I think that's a good, there's one thing, if we're like talking about identifying quality sources, right? It's one thing when you correct or you're like, I now have information.
Right.
There's another thing, and and I believe strongly in this, you can identify a bad source if they are constantly contradicting themselves, right? Yep. Today they say do this, 2 days later they say do something totally different. Right now they're saying, slow until you can see the exit, and then they do a video or may write an article or they do whatever a couple weeks later where they say get on the gas as soon as you possibly can.
And we see this a lot, particularly in your arena, right? YouTube. Honestly, the fault isn't completely with the content creators, right? The fault is largely with YouTube just because of the way YouTube monetizes things.
Oh, it's terrible because I can talk about that. They've changed their algorithm where all they're looking for is what they call the click-through rate. And the click-through rate is when they show you a thumbnail, if you click on it, you get credit for that. And the higher your click-through rate is, the more YouTube is promoting you right now. They're not promoting based on quality of content. So the way you get high click-through rate is you have everybody looks like they're sneezing in the thumbnail.
Yeah.
Right.
Or you create content that is somewhat salacious. It's content that is purposely
never do this.
Always do that.
Yeah.
Or it contradicts something like, they're purposely being contradictory, and to get those clicks, to get those views, which makes the channel grow, which makes you money.
Clickbait.
It's clickbait. And it's unfortunate that that's how it works. And I'm always trying to skirt the line, how much can I get away with that, But I'm unwilling. I feel like I have a responsibility to not put out contradictory information for the sake of growing the channel. Right. I feel like people's safety is on the line, and I try really hard, not just to look how great I am, but but I take it seriously. Yeah. I think there's a responsibility. And it's part of why I love working with you guys, because not only, you guys are doing all this stuff too, but you have access by your association with a certain manufacturer. You guys get access to some top level engineers and racers. And, I believe you guys work with Bosch, who develops the traction control systems. That's access that, Bob's YouTube channel barn extravaganza doesn't have.
And so talking about Bob, right? So where do we find these best practices? We find them again at what the best riders, what the best teams, what the best engineers are doing. These bikes, like May was saying, are not designed by Bob. They're designed by those guys that are winning the races, winning championships, and not falling down. Because that's how you win a championship, is you go fast, you go consistently, and you don't fall down.
And you don't crash, right? Yeah, that's a big part of it. Everyone's like, well, you can do that on the racetrack, because crashing is no, you don't win championships in the gravel trap.
Right.
Yep.
So look at your sources, right? If your sources are using Bob as their example, there's a red flag right there. Mm-hmm. If your sources are going, hey, I talked to Sylvan Guntoli. Hey, I talked to Fabio. Hey, I talked to, Josh Hayes, whoever else, right, that has that pedigree. Okay, I might listen now. What's this guy saying?
And to that point, it's fascinating on Reddit. You go to our motorcyclists and the arguments are atrocious. You go to our track
I would use
days.
hilarious.
Sometimes hilarious. Yeah, but you're where is this logic coming from? Right. You go to our track days and the same topic presented turns into a really compelling discussion where people are bringing up informed, and it's our track days is surprisingly delightfully entertaining and informed, where our motorcyclists can sometimes be a train wreck. It's hard to look away and you get upset and you're like, no,
There's, yeah.
Right, yeah, we're all there. I'll bet you, Reddit has a tremendous amount of value, but Reddit also kind of has the flaw that a compelling argument sometimes gets the points without the validity, right? That makes a good argument, or I like what he said, so I'm giving him the upvote, even though it's nonsense.
The term sophist comes to mind. They they talk a lot, but they don't say anything. Yeah. Right? Politicians is another word.
Yeah.
Man, you can sound there are some arguments that I've seen on Reddit, just not even our motorcycles, but just generally that is a beautiful argument. You've said absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. You've changed no minds. You don't actually have a point, but man, you're good at talking. And this is one of the biggest problems I have, getting back to our ordinary topic of new riders, is new rider coaches. For the most part, fantastic people, they really have their heart set on helping riders.
They're doing the Lord's work.
They really are. That's where the rubber meets the road. The problem I have is a lot of the new rider coaches that I know personally have never taken an interest in investing in their own skill set. They can parrot the words. They can look at the book and go, do this, 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 and this. Well, what question do you have? Well, my book says this.
Yeah.
Right. They don't know how to answer it. Versus a lot of the instructors I've known over the years, the ones that do go on and they do track days and they get into racing, their ability as a basic rider instructor also blossoms because they can understand those kind of more complicated questions.
Yep. Well, and the more you understand and the more you can explain to different people, because not everybody understands things exactly the same way. So as a coach, you need to be able to adjust how you say things and how you explain them so that each individual person, it clicks, because it doesn't click the same for everybody.
Well, and as a female rider, I'm sure you've seen like different challenges in this where they're trying to like talk to you.
Yeah.
You know, like, can you speak to that? Is it like the challenges?
Oh
like,
yeah, I get talked at a lot. And that I say talked at because that's what it is. Like,
mansplained?
Yeah, it's like, I don't need you to explain that to me. I just need you to help me understand it. So don't keep repeating the same thing over and over again. Like, I need you to actually explain something to me. It's hard, but I know a lot of male riders that are the same way. It's like, not everybody has the same vocabulary and their brain doesn't process things the same. So you need to be able to explain what you're actually trying to say. Because telling somebody, okay, you need to go to the brakes here and this is why you do it, is not the same as go to the brakes when you feel nervous. Because that nervous feeling is different for everybody. And individually, as you get better riding, you can sneak up on that nervousness and you can push it. But if you say, brake here, that point is not always going to be the same.
Right. Someone that we all know recently had an experience like this where female rider, very like experienced rider, she's been riding for years and years and years and years, at an educational environment, and the male coach was like, tip in here and do this, just trust me.
Yep.
And
That's
you know,
scary.
it's horrifying. It's horrifying, right? And so a good coach, a good program makes a world of difference. And that's something else I think it's harder for new riders to discern is, you know, we use the term MSF as kind of this ubiquitous term, but states have the option to contract with whomever they want to develop their new rider program. In America, it's a little bit more convoluted. So sometimes like MSF is kind of like the dog that gets kicked all the time because it's like the name everybody knows. But not all programs are created equal. Even within like a single state, there might be multiple providers using the same source, but they end up with very different results. You know, like this program is taught only by police officers. They have a very different attitude than this program that is all taught by enthusiasts.
We're actually working with a program, WMST, out of Washington. We're kind of partnering with them a little bit, seeing how they do approach their new rider programs. And they have a really interesting system. It's a dual licensing program, or a two-class licensing program. So you go to the first class, it's basically, you know, the first 2 days of your MSF or basic rider course, right? You don't get a license then. You have to come back 6 months later, or within 6 months, and take the advanced course, or the second half of that
So
class.
they basically get like a learner's permit? They are allowed to ride during the daytime, or?
I'm honestly not sure exactly what they do in those 6 months, but you have to come back and finish the second half of the course. And so they teach brand new riders braking past tip-in. They teach brand new riders how to go to the brakes in a corner. So they're directly talking to the two places that riders are dying the most, in corners and at intersections.
Right.
So in the process of looking at SMSA stuff, I was looking at...
And what is SMSA, just for like those who aren't
the
familiar?
State Motorcycle Safety Association. So it's all... Each of those respective state programs, they all get together every year for a national summit to talk about motorcycle safety, statistics, all these other things. And so I was looking through the data that the Federal Highway Administration put together. It's called the Motorcycle Crash Causation Study. You can email them and get the information for yourself. Fantastic people over there. The study is super interesting. My figures aren't going to be 100% accurate, but off the top of my head, something like 80% of all motorcycle fatalities showed no evidence of brake use.
Wow.
Yeah. So
maybe we should cover the brake.
maybe we should cover the brake.
Yeah.
And then of the remaining 20%, about half of that showed evidence of locking the brakes. So there's an issue of, can I go to the brakes? And there's also an issue of, how do I use the brakes?
Yep. If you panic, if you don't have the knowledge and the skills and to do it properly, That's just as dangerous.
If you're not covering the brake, there's a higher probability, like that second at 60 miles an hour is what, like 80 feet or something? I don't know.
88 feet, yeah.
Yeah, right? And so like 88 feet is a world if there's like a semi tipped over in front of you.
Even half a second, right? If that reaction time is half a second that you're saving by covering the brake, it's 44 feet.
Yep.
Can you miss a bus in 44 feet?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
And if we're late to a control, we're generally abrupt with it, right? And it's not necessarily how much brake pressure we're using, but it's how fast we're riding that brake. Like we say, load the tire before we work the tire. If we're not letting that suspension collapse and letting that contact patch spread out and actually loading that tire before we truly ask it to work and help us stop in an emergency, we're just blowing straight through that force of travel, blowing straight through the compression damping, everything else, and overwhelming the tire. All of a sudden, you are going to go down because you lose traction.
That's where I imagine the never touch your brake advice came from.
Yep.
Right.
It wasn't that the control was bad. It was the application of the control that was bad. And so we're putting a Band-Aid on the wrong wound.
Well, from my understanding, it also comes from, back in the day of having drum brakes.
Drum brakes were, I don't know. I had an old motorcycle with drum brakes and I don't know if I could lock the tire if I tried. Maybe the rear I could, but the front tire, it was, the brake worked on geologic terms. It eroded speed the way water erodes a mountain.
Gotcha.
There wasn't a whole lot of, but that brings out the great point. The motorcycle evolution, especially tire evolution and suspension evolution, it's a different ballgame than it was when I was learning to ride. It's better now.
But we're still using 1970s technique for modern technology.
Right.
And by modern, I mean, do you have disc brakes?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have radial tires? You know?
Are the tires black and round? So if we're upgrading brakes, if we're upgrading ABS, traction control, tire technology, suspension geometry, suspension components, if we're upgrading all these hard parts, why does it make sense, or does it make sense, to have never upgraded the software, never upgraded this?
Yeah, the software is kind of like a good analogy, right? Like I have this brand new computer,
but
right?
it's running Windows
Super
95.
mega. Dude, Windows, I'm on DOS, man. Like, we're text-based.
But it's that's the same thing we're seeing in the motorcycle industry, right? Like you can go out today as a brand new rider, just graduated your basic riding class, and buy a $40,000 Panigale V4S, right? If you can find one, but you can buy that turnkey superbike, 200 and something horsepower, best electronics in the world, ridiculous tires, just superb bike.
But then you're going to load Windows 95 on it.
Yeah.
Right. But you're jumping on it with effectively Windows 95 or MS-DOS.
Yeah, and so
For you guys that are too young to know what MS-DOS is, like
you had to type
Google
things
it.
in.
Yeah.
You had to Google it. Like the internet, you had to type words in, and you didn't get pictures. You just read words on the internet.
Yeah,
you had to log
Let's
into other website, into other. Anyway, but it's not only you're missing out on the potential. Right? The potential of a modern motorcycle when ridden with modern techniques it's glorious. It is a spectacular experience.
And that's one of the heartbreaking things about the way riders are taught, right? Is the answer for everything is just slow down earlier or slow down more.
Yeah, or you should have been going slower.
That's the worst.
That's the worst one. Well, what do I do now? Like, do I just roll back my DeLorean to go back?
I'm already running wide in a corner. I'll go ahead and rewind
and
time.
Darn it, I should have. Should have doesn't help me in the moment. You know?
And let's be honest, it's not fun to ride a motorcycle at 20 miles an hour everywhere.
No, it's terrible.
Like if you're going up a canyon ride, like the Loman Loop that we do, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that 80% of those corners are blind corners. You can't see around the corner. So how am I supposed to set my speed for a corner that I can't see around? And the answer is, well, just go slower. Where the hell's the fun in that?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's not just that. The slower you go on a motorcycle, the less stable it is. So you're essentially telling students to slow down and make their motorcycle less rideable.
You're also giving up. So if you're riding that slowly, where you're just basically neutral throttle everywhere, right? So you're around the corners, you're giving up on control of your contact patch, your suspension geometry, and really everything that makes the bike ride the way it's designed to.
I'm going to say you're giving up on joy.
Yeah.
The joy of that, it's simply not fun.
And I can already hear the comments, oh, well, you're just riding too fast then. You're wanting to be a racer on the street. No,
not at all. I'll be the first person to say, chill out, man. But you can still, you can have a good time without putting yourself or anybody else at risk.
Right.
and run kind of a reasonable, fun pace.
So like when we're out riding, we trail brake for every corner we slow for, right? If I'm slowing down for a corner, I'm picking up a little bit of brakes, even if it's 1 or 2 points of brakes, right? 1 or 2%.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just enough, like, hey, my engine braking might be plenty to slow me down for this, but I'm still gonna, as a street rider, I'm still gonna pick up that brake because I want that brake light on at a minimum. Not only that, if my brake light is on, if I'm already there, right, already decelerating and controlling that deceleration, because let's face it, engine braking is not adjustable, it's not repeatable, and it's not controllable. You're not going to pull the clutch in mid-corner because you're removing a different element of control, right? You have no control over the rear at that point. But by having my fingers on the brake lever, by using a little bit of brakes, when I'm coming around that blind corner and there's a deer sitting there, I can just simply add more brakes. I don't have to go, oh.
Now what do? I got to adjust my thing.
Right.
And I also want to bring up, for anybody, and I get this all the time, that there's no such thing as a blind corner. I welcome you to come out west.
Yes.
Because they are all blind. There's mountains in between them. Or they'll say, well, just pay attention to the speed advisory sign. Again, come out west. Maybe one corner in 50 has a speed advisory sign, and you're lucky if that one has any relevance in reality.
Right.
Like I think one of the recent videos I just did, the speed limit on the road was 15 miles an hour, and the speed advisory sign was 25. So
speed up for the corner.
Speed up for the corner, I guess.
Right.
We have to be able to make our own decisions. We have to have the skill set to deal with these dynamic environments that are ever changing and unpredictable.
And even, getting back to our best practices discussion, let's say you do use that posted advisory sign, right? Like every single time you go to a corner, hey, 35 mile an hour corner, I'm going to go 35. What happens when it's raining?
What happens? There's a rock in the middle of the road.
Yeah. Are you still going to go 35?
But the sign said.
Yeah.
I'm really trusting that guy who gets paid $6 an hour to go put up signs on the side of the road. I'm putting a lot of faith in that guy.
So at the end of the day, it goes back to, why would you practice something that will only work in the perfect?
All right, so let's talk about common new rider mistakes that we've seen.
Right. Abruptness.
Abruptness is the big one.
Upgrading their bike before they upgrade themselves.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Like, how many people out there, they go buy the new motorcycle, they buy a helmet maybe, right? Depends on if it's a law. Like here, it's not a law. Out west, come out west. Helmets aren't required.
Nobody cares.
But they go buy a slip-on, right? I mean, I like a slip-on as much as the next guy.
I mean, I still run a stock exhaust on the MT10 because Yamaha nailed it with that exhaust note.
Yeah.
But that, it doesn't, like, bang for the buck, right?
It's $1,000 for now, like earplugs. Now I got to buy earplugs too.
Yeah, it's $1,000 to tell everyone else how cool you are.
Right, and to annoy your neighbors.
Right, but to your point, it's so common, right? Like as soon as you buy a bike, I have to do this to it, I have to do that to it, I have to do this to it. Stock bikes are pretty dang good.
Yeah. They're amazing. And I understand the excitement, right? You bought the new thing. You're excited about the new thing. I want to make the new thing mine. I want to personalize it. That's part of motorcycle culture, right? We all want to personalize it.
Yeah.
So we started really into motorsports with a Jeep, right? Like I was stationed down in Southern California, like not the fun end of Southern California. The
Bakersfield part of Southern
California.
Yes, the Barstow.
Yeah, so
I
was down at Fort Irwin, right? And so the only thing to do there, and I asked one of my senior NCOs at the time, I was like, hey, what's there to do at Irwin? The answer was leave. And so we got into Jeeps, right? I had a Jeep at the time, started getting to rock crawling. And kind of the way we thought about upgrading the Jeep for rock crawling was first protect your investment. Like add the armor, add the sliders, add the the engine case covers. Cool, that is a fantastic choice. Add the protection for yourself. Get the helmet, get the get the gloves, get the boots, get the suit, whatever you feel you need, whatever your personal level of risk acceptance is. You want the most protective thing in the world, you're going to go carve up some canyons, or you just don't like accepting a bunch of risk, grab a suit, leather race suit from Dainese. But once you protect your investment, then start working on your skill. Because once you'll find that upgrading your skill, you'll get a better understanding of where the stock vehicle, whatever that vehicle is actually starting to limit you, and then replace that part. So like for riding for example, right? Level up your skill, you're getting to a point where, man, I'm starting to get some brake fade. Okay, let's think about changing out, pads, lines, and fluids. Okay, cool. Now I'm much happier with the brakes. I'm still increasing my skill. Man, my suspension is kind of holding me back. But you will never know that your suspension is holding you back until you get to that level of skill and that level of pace.
that's the mistake a lot of people get into with upgrading motorcycles is they think, well, the bike has a problem. Yeah, but can the bike problem be fixed with my skills? It's way cheaper. If I learn a new skill, right, and I get better at that thing, I take that with me everywhere I go for the rest of my riding career.
Sure. Yeah.
I put a slip-on or I put a fork or whatever, that's good for that motorcycle. And then when that motorcycle's gone, that upgrade is gone.
Yep.
Right.
Well, that's the argument that we get a lot with people in teaching going to schools. Schools are expensive.
They are.
That's great. How much was that exhaust you put on? How much were those forks? How much was that rear shock? You're telling me that all of those things are less expensive than going to a school?
You talk about adjustability, right? That's what we're chasing as riders. Is not because we don't ride by rote, right? We ride based on direction. Whatever control we need to be on is dictated by what we need the bike to do to get it turned. And so riding based on direction means we have to be adjustable by nature, and it allows us to be adjustable because we're not riding based on this crack in the pavement there and that mark over there. So yesterday we did it, or 2 days ago now, we did a 2-up ride, right? Mostly stock MT10.
On the racetrack, by the way.
On the racetrack, yeah. So 2-up ride on the racetrack. I am not a light person.
I'm not a light.
Almost 6 foot.
Yep.
So there's a lot of weight on the MT10, right? I do have a shock on it, but the shock was never set up for 2 people.
Well, and you forgot to, do a little bit of adjustment.
Yeah, so I didn't
really
do
soft.
anything with the preload. It was very soft, very squishy. So we're just kind of doing this around some of the corners, and was still fun. But it was immediately identified, okay, there's an issue now. And I've changed something on the bike, namely what we're doing on the bike, because we added extra weight.
Well, a lot of people ride with their significant other,
Yeah.
right? This is not an uncommon scenario that you're bringing up here.
Right, and so I could have said, oh, well, the suspension is trash, we shouldn't do this. No, we just went out and had fun. Because, again, that ability to adjust our riding, that skill set to go, okay, something has changed, let's figure this out. So I have to use a lot more rear brake because there's more weight, and I have more braking force available in the rear. And using the rear brake to slow that rebound, right? So there's so much weight on the rear now because of the 2 of us sitting back there that the shock was just doing this behind me. So I had to slow down that rebound by using the rear brake, right? I had to add one of those extra tools to slow everything down. And then when it came time for compression, if I would just do this, there's probably plenty of grip because there's so much mechanical weight. But you have to be super slow sneaking on that first 5% with a passenger on the back, because otherwise you'll just blow through that shock travel. So it really becomes kind of a game of what problem can you throw at me? Let's ride around it.
Yep.
Well, and I'm going to quote Nick Einach on this one because I think it's something he said that just really resonated with me. And it's like, we shouldn't ride with hope, hoping we slowed down enough, hoping I don't have to lean anymore, hoping the turn doesn't get tighter, but become technical riders, and like you were talking about the rear brake, advice out there all the time is like, well, I never use my rear brake, or I only use my rear brake, or whatever. No, these things are tools that do things.
Right.
And when we become technical riders, we begin to understand what these controls do in these different situations, and I can apply the tool when I need it. There's a Japanese proverb that if I only own a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Yep.
And so like by having a bigger toolbox, it really just comes back to, and I know we get really wrapped up in the techniques and the stuff like that, but it really comes back to is it makes it more fun.
It does.
It makes the sport more fun.
If you're the rider that's throwing money at your bike, you're literally just turning everything into a nail. Like, you have a hammer now. That's all you have is your wallet.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do with that? If everything looks like a monetary problem, you're just going to keep throwing money at it. But once you realize, no, it's a me problem. Like, once you take your ego and put it in check and go, nah, man, you might be the top 5% of riders, but man, there's a lot of people faster than you and better than you. But once you understand that, once you can be honest with yourself and go, I need to improve, then things stop looking more like a money problem and start looking more like a, hey, let's find some technique here. Let's really work on this and put some effort into it.
Yep. Well, and the thing that I found with Champ School and Champ U is it takes the drama out of riding because it gives you the tools to know what to do. So like, say you're coming in hot to a corner, whether you're on the track, whether you're on the road, whatever. That sense of panic that you get can overrule everything. And then all of a sudden you don't know what to do. You freeze up, you go off the road, you go off the track,
It's not
you're
fun.
down. Yeah. If you know, oh, what I need to do is I need to not look at the outside of the track, not look at the outside of the road, and I need to put my eyes back to the apex and find where I need to go. Guess what? You don't feel like you're coming in hot again.
Yeah,
the
instead of
gone.
like the road, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, you should have gone slower. Okay, no, we're past that now. Here's what I can do in these situations.
Exactly.
And that's, again, what's great, on going through that.
Just start thinking, hey, radius equals miles an hour,
Yeah.
right? Like, okay, cool, I gotta go to the brakes.
Well, and that kind of leads into something else that I was kind of wanting to talk about. You get a lot of sources out there that talk about like finding your style. Like I'm going to find my riding style is I like to counterweight.
Well, Fabio has his style. All these
Right,
riders
right,
have their
exactly.
style.
Yeah, we hear about style a lot, and I think, and I want to hear what you have to say about this too, is that style comes into play once you have like the fundamental basics nailed.
Right.
Then we can start thinking about style. And honestly, I think style is I like red more than I like blue.
Yeah.
That's the style I kind of.
I like my suit to be bright colored.
There we go. I like to look like a radioactive bumblebee.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
And honestly, like, that's what style should be perceived as, is that little bit of, extra flair that somebody does. But, people get so wrapped around the axle on like 5% of what's important in motorcycle riding.
Yeah.
And really, it's like the very last 5%. When you're chasing 10th at the world stage, that's when that style can come into play. But you look at the guys in MotoGP, World Superbike, Moto America, the guys that are running out front, they're all doing the same things, different degrees of application, maybe, slightly different just because their bodies are different, their bikes are different, but they're still going to the brakes so they're nervous. They're still staying with their brakes until they're happy with their speed and direction. They're using neutral throttle. They're using these controls. They're loading the tire before they work the tire. They're all using them the same. All the things that matter, they're doing the same.
Yeah.
I love those super slow motion shots that they'll do, because they have the MotoGP has the money, right? Where they have like the whole pack going through a chicane, right?
Yeah.
And it's like the one bike tips in and the other bike comes out, and you watch all 30 riders or 20 riders in the paddock. They all look fundamentally exactly the same.
And they're all on different machines.
They're all on different machines.
They're all physically different.
Small, tall.
Yeah. And so at that point you go, well, why the hell am I caring about what kind of flair he does? Why am I caring about, this guy's foot, is it a 34-degree angle on the foot peg versus a 42-degree angle? Why do we care about that if we're not trail braking yet?
Yep.
Right, yeah. And it's the,
You're getting lost. You're getting wrapped around the axle for this 5% when you don't have the 95% down yet. Mm-hmm. Let's focus on that 95% of the sport that really matters. That's going to, keep you from running wide, keep you from dying in a corner.
When we moved to Salt Lake City, it was a job with the Forest Service for the Olympics, the 2002 Olympic Games. That's how we ended up in this area. And so I had the tremendous opportunity as I was hanging out with, gold medal athletes. And of course, being kind of like a motorcycle track guy, I really got kind of geeked out about the bobsleds guys. Like I could kind of talk to them in their language. We kind of spoke. And I remember speaking to the guy who won the gold medal. And I was like, hey, so like what was your trick to win the gold medal? This massive, pool of people that do this. And he goes, honestly, every run, all I try to do is get the basics right.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to do is just get the basics. If I can get the basics right, I'll have a good run.
Yeah, the Marine Corps uses the term, and so do we in the sniper community, brilliance in the basics. Like, at a face value, and this is going to probably piss off a lot of people on YouTube, there is no secret sauce in the sport.
There isn't.
There isn't some piece of information that's going to go, boom, you are now the best motorcycle rider in the world because you found this secret locked up compartmentalized
nobody's holding
information.
anything back from you. Like,
No.
and Sylvan Guintoli's YouTube channel is awesome. I love his channel
fantastic.
because this dude's one of the best riders in the world, and he's like, let me tell you, I'm here,
Oh,
and I'm going to do it in
internally.
French, and
Yeah.
I'm going to do it in English.
Yeah.
Like the dude's awesome, and there is no secret sauce.
And that's the beautiful thing about best practices, right? We can mimic those same things, those same techniques that Fabio and Mark and all those guys are using, just at a different degree of application, right? Where they're hanging off the bike, dragging shoulders around a corner, we can still use the technique of hanging off the bike and reducing the lean angle
At 45 miles an hour,
by just moving our head.
Yeah.
Same technique, different degree of application. Where our trail braking on the street might be, hey, I'm going to use like 2 or 3 points of brakes just to get the brake light on and get ready for this corner that I can't see around. They're sitting there loading that front end and bottoming out the forks in the corner. When you start looking at the clickbait headlines, right? When you start going, world-changing technique here. Let's do this other thing instead of what everyone else does.
Right. I think I know the video you're talking about.
There's a red flag there. I'm not going to...
Yeah, no, that's not our game.
But there ends up being a red flag there, right? Like, why is this person saying to do something completely different than what the best riders in the world are doing? First, go ahead and watch the video. Does it match? Does what this person's saying match what world champions are doing? If not, why are they doing it? If this was a better technique, why wouldn't the world champions be doing it?
Right, and I'll say this, like if you hate the clickbait, right? Like give YouTube creators a break with the clickbaity stuff. It's what we're kind of forced into, and the algorithm's going to change in a couple years and it'll be different. But right now, this is, if we want to survive, if I want to be able to pay for these cameras and the microphones and the lights, and there has to be a degree of it.
Right.
But if you hate clickbait, the one way to kind of like game the system is you click subscribe and you click on the bell. And then when you first go to your YouTube, don't click on the thing it shows you, click on your subscriptions tab. And that breaks the algorithm, because then you're collating what you want to see, not YouTube. And it allows us as creators to still be able to kind of get the reach that we're trying to get to survive without having to like stoop to the clickbait.
And there should be like a whole separate, podcast subtopic, right? Like as a motorcyclist, how do you use YouTube?
Yeah.
Where can you use YouTube?
Well, it's like Google. There's a art to using Google. You can't just go into Google and type something in and it finds exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, you don't type in the answer to the question you want. Like, is the Earth flat? Google will give you plenty of sources that the Earth is flat.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that and like the upvotes, right? Like, this is not a democratic sport in the sense that the majority rules.
Right.
And the dangerous thing is, we see a lot of comments of, oh, well, this YouTube personality says to do it, therefore I will.
Yeah, be careful of that. And as a YouTube personality, be careful of that. Like, look at where that came from.
Like, you even a couple years ago had some videos we were kind of scratching our heads at and we're like, what's going on, Dave? But you came out and you were like, hey, look, I did this thing wrong years ago.
Yeah.
Like, let's fix this. Let's stop that information right now and let's get back to this.
Yeah, more information changed the whole game. And I will continue to do that. But I don't know if I heard it from you first, or I want to be wrong for as little time as possible. Right. But I will be wrong. I will make mistakes. But the difference is I get frustrated when, a source doubles down on the bad idea because it appears as though they don't want to admit that they were wrong.
Right.
Yep.
For May, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but as a female rider, like, especially being around Champ School and being around the curriculum and the guys, probably a lot more about motorcycling than most people. Just hands down, you just do.
Well, I mean, before I even started riding, I went to Champ School with him. I didn't ride. I just sat in the classroom and listened. And it's like nothing really made sense right then because I didn't have anything to apply it to, but I had that little knowledge base in my head. And then when I started riding, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, this stuff makes sense. So I have a little, I don't know if I want to call it a coddled upbringing into the motorcycle community, but I had a very smooth transition into riding. I had all the instruction.
When guys mansplain stuff to you, right?
I just zone out.
And it's one of those things where you can't tell them like, hey, I know more than you, shut up.
Well, the other thing is I'm a lot more cautious than men. And that I think is the biggest difference between female and male riders. And I hate the women rider thing. Like, I am a rider who happens to be female. I am not a woman first. I am a motorcycle rider. And it's hard to be a woman who, I know we're cautious. We have our willingness to put risk into something is a lot smaller than a male's. So I'm going to be slower because I want to perfect what I'm doing before I become fast. And I know a lot of other women are like that. We're very cautious. We're very hard on ourselves. So we have to be perfect before we will be willing to take the risk. So I might be slower than you, but I'm sorry, I'm a better rider than you are.
So to wrap up our first episode, I thought we should come up with what we think are the best beginner bike advice. So I started off our best beginner bikes to buy. So start off, I went to the internet because it is the source of all things. And I have...
I like how you phrase the source of all things, not the source of all truth.
We know the earth is flat, man. We have evidence that the earth is flat, right? The Earth,
truth is out there.
What was the Flat Earth Society has members all around the globe?
Yes.
Okay, so hang on. So this is what the internet says is the best bikes for the new rider to buy.
Please be a V4S on there.
In the adventure category, they have the Royal Enfield Himalayan, the BMW GS310, the KTM 390 Adventure, the Versys 300, the CB500X, and the TW200.
Okay, so for street riding, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about?
We're talking about like the legitimate first-time buyer, and we got to assume like we are a global entity here, so only 30% of our views actually come from America. So we got to consider European.
Sure.
You know, we get a lot of people from Australia, New Zealand.
The TW200, maybe Australia, I see that, right? Like you need a bigger tire to squish the spiders or something?
Yeah.
I get it. But man, there's a lot of little bikes.
These are
for
little
American
bikes.
standards,
Yeah.
right? For Indian standards, I know I just chatted with a gentleman who's from India yesterday, actually in the paddock, and he was saying, a 600cc, 1100cc bike, that's unheard of in India. Mm-hmm. You got a 125, you're doing pretty good.
They also have access to motorcycles that we don't have here. There's but I think I know where you're going with this.
So there's an issue with the little bikes, especially for beginner riders, right? There's actually two issues with it. One is you don't have the power to get around a problem. So you're on the freeway, there's a truck coming into your lane, he doesn't see you because you're tiny and you're in his blind spot as a newer rider. Totally feasible, right? You don't have the power to accelerate past that truck or to at least get into his mirror somewhere. So you're gonna have to go to the brakes instead. What happens when that car is behind you? You don't have the power to go forward, you can't brake hard because there's a car right behind you. Mm-hmm. I would like, as a newer rider, a little more power to get around a problem.
Yeah,
not so much power that I yeet myself off the road,
right?
But enough to get around a problem.
So looking at this adventure category, I think the adventure category, we can maybe cheat it to a little smaller.
Yeah. Sure.
Because there's a probably higher probability they're going to be riding off-road.
Yeah, like the
I think the
Adventure 390,
TW200
right?
we can objectively
Yeah,
say is no. It's not even a good dirt bike.
I would say that
it's a good
the
sprinkler
Himalayan
bike.
off, too.
Yeah, and I don't think a new rider really wants to be dealing with the Royal Enfield. I think they're awesome. I would love to own one.
Beautiful bike.
Yeah.
But I think it's better to kind of stick with like the bigger brands. This is like for the new rider experience. The BMW GS310 I think is kind of a humdinger of an adventure little adventure bike.
Not bad. Like that,
And they're relatively cheap.
KTM.
They're like $4,000.
And so kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm looking, to recommend a new bike to a new rider is a standard bike, a standard naked upright.
Well, we have that category later on.
Oh,
this is we're just talking adventure bikes right now.
Okay, I like the 390 Adventure and I like the GS, right?
Well, and they have the Versys 300 in here and the CB500X. I say the Versys 650s be better.
Versus
Yes.
650.
Yeah.
That was my first bike.
And mine actually.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
That was the I go end over end on that
Yeah.
bike.
And then he gave it to me, and then I got to ride it with a little bit of a
Wait,
tweak
like
in
it-
the
like-
Fixed the
handlebars.
frame to an extent.
They like to turn left. It was like Zoolander. He only
Subframe
turned
was
to
a little
left.
tweaked, but
Yeah.
But I think the Versys is an amazing motorcycle.
Yeah. It
I think
is.
it's a very underrated. It's a great bike.
Oh, yeah.
And also the CB500X. I think that bike
like,
is
those two bikes
awesome.
will run forever too.
Yeah.
Like you can try to grenade them as best you. They're like the Toyota Hilux of motorcycles.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, like axe heads wear out faster than they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're into the cruisers, and I'm not as familiar with cruisers, but
I'm not either. Not my
there's
jam.
some on here that we're gonna objectively know
Okay.
that this is what the internet says.
Is the
right?
Rebel on there?
The Rebel's on here twice.
Ooh.
Yeah. So we have the V-Star 250, which I think falls right back. That's just too little.
Yeah.
Like that's a great
Yeah.
MSF bike, but that's small.
Oh yeah, fantastic for do I want a cruiser? It's a fantastic test bike for do I want this riding position?
Right. And then next we have the Honda Rebel 300 or the 500.
500.
Definitely the
500.
500.
Yeah.
The 300 is just a little too little. And then the Sportster 883. And this is probably the most recommended new bike out there. The Sportster
That's
883.
a heavy bike.
It
It's
is.
like 600 pounds,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's no.
I think
Yeah.
the 883 would be a good like second bike.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah. And especially, and I think we're going to talk about this in a bit because I'll bet you we have the same perspective on this too. But you may find you don't like cruisers.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is that's probably the most expensive bike on the list. Like that's a big investment for something that you may not like in 6 weeks.
Yep.
But if you are a Harley man,
Oh yeah, hands
through and
down.
through, here
Yep.
is the Harley Street 500.
Yes,
But it's
much better option.
still a little heavy. It's 500 pounds, but
that
way
extra
better
150
option.
pounds is a big difference.
Yes.
It is. Yeah.
That is a significantly better
and it's
first bike.
more manageable.
I'm really glad they made that bike.
Oh, yeah.
I really am. It's because the 883 is terrible. It's basically a 1200 that's sleeved down.
Yeah.
You know, so you're basically starting on a 1200 that has less power. And then the last one is the Indian Scout. which is
That's not a bad little bike.
Yeah, it's a cool
good.
little bike. I like it. I like the color. It's like the red. It's kind of neat. So yeah, so I think with I think the Rebel 500 would probably be my top.
I
on
think that
one.
would be.
Or the Harley Street 500. I think those are both, or the Indian Scout. So those
But
three.
what do those three have in common? They're more standard style, right?
Yeah, they're way less. You're not like.
You're not forward foot controls and not,
Right.
or at least not as.
I think the Scout is a little forward control-y, but
Yeah.
the Sportster, I think the other ones, your feet are below you, which makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Especially as a newer rider, where you're, hey, I don't have the balance yet. I
Well,
don't
and
have,
we use our feet. We actually
Oh,
use
yeah.
our feet to ride the motorcycle. So when you have forward controls, you're kind of taking away a control.
Yep. Well, and the other thing is when you're stopping, a lot of new riders don't have that brilliant brake control yet. And if you're a little too hard on the brake and you get that heavy bike offset, it's going to fall over.
Yeah, because once it kind of hits that like tipping point,
Yeah,
especially
you
when you're
can't
dealing with
stop
like
it.
a 600-pound Sportster, it's going.
Yeah.
It's going over, you know. All right, so now we get to bikes that are a little bit more near and dear to my heart. Naked bikes.
Okay.
this is the best category. Like, I'm just going to say, this is the best category for a new rider.
I
right?
agree. I think
Naked,
every new rider should start on a naked bike because it gives you,
You can do everything.
it gives you time to decide the kind of riding you enjoy the most.
So when I started riding, right, I started riding because I wanted to save money. I didn't want to go to a racetrack. I thought guys that drug their knees and elbows and shoulders and everything else around a
Crazy.
racetrack were stupid. Not even just crazy, but stupid. Like,
look at you now.
These guys are morons. And yeah, now I'm that guy.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know what that says about me, but you know.
Adapt.
But I had no idea that I wanted to do that. I had no idea I wanted to jump on an R6 and rally around a racetrack. I thought I was going to be more of a cafe racer or a bobber style guy. And you know, you jump on a standard bike and you can kind of get a feel for everything. You
yeah.
can do a little bit of adventure stuff if you have, you know, decent tires. You can do canyon carving. You can do let's commute around town. You can do the longer trips without.
You can do track days with them.
Yeah.
I see people doing track days on them. The first bike on the list is the Duke 390. That is.
I know that's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do. Well, we have an RC. We have the RC. But
Yeah.
no, like the Duke 390, we see them at track days all the time.
My favorite bike on a track so far is, you know, naked upright.
Yeah.
You know, the MT. I still rally around the MT10. I'm faster on the MT10 than I am on my R6, which is not supposed to be the thing, and that's something I'm working on.
Yeah, I
but-
think years ago, Motorcyclist Magazine did a thing where they tested super bikes against naked bikes, like the same equivalent back to back, and almost everyone was turning quicker lap times on the naked bikes.
it's so
Yep.
much more comfortable.
Yeah, and you can see
You can
better.
ride all day
Yeah.
and not
Yeah,
get
you don't get
fatigued.
tired. It's nice.
And they're giggle bikes.
They are.
Yeah, and they wheelie better.
But I mean, now this is to say, I would not recommend an MT10 as a starter bike.
No. But there is you have the, I can't read it.
MT03.
The MT03 and the Vitpillin 401, which the Vitpillin kind of falls into the retro thing.
Yeah.
I think that thing's super cool.
If you're a rider that is in a dense urban area, right? You're downtown LA, you're downtown New York, something like that. MT03, not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because it's super narrow, upright, you can see over traffic, you're not going
They
to get tired,
look good.
super
Yep.
nimble, pretty
They look
bike.
really good.
If you're out west, if you're
MT07.
MT07, all
Yeah,
day.
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, just the bigger roads, the bigger, faster roads. And I imagine like our New Zealand or in Australia riders, like the big open places.
Yep.
An MT03 would be
And
screaming everywhere.
Honestly, I think,
Yeah.
you know, as far as new riders go, the MT07 is probably the perfect new rider bike because you have enough power to get around a problem without so much power that you're going to hurt yourself.
And it looks good.
It looks good. It sounds good. You know, it's that cross-plane motor. Like, it's just such a beautiful.
Yeah, it's a
bike.
humdinger of a bike. We have a friend who runs the Yamaha demo days, rides around with the fleet trucks all summer, and she's like, "Oh, that MT07 is my favorite
Could
motorcycle."
you imagine if they released an SP version?
I mean, wouldn't that be great? That'd be fantastic. But on here, we also got to give credit to the Honda CB300 or the CB500.
500.
The
500,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's the same thing we're talking about. On the list, the Grom.
Interesting.
I think I put that in the TW200 category.
That's in the. I want a pocket bike later in life because they look silly.
Yeah.
I see people who start with Groms and they develop the worst habits.
yeah.
Because you can get away with everything.
You can get away with everything, yeah.
There's no power, so you're not really going to hurt yourself. There's no brakes, so you're also not going to hurt yourself. Like, there's no inertia because there's no mass. Like, you can get away with. It's basically like riding in a parking lot everywhere.
Yeah, so like for inexperienced riders, and why so many of our experienced rider friends buy them, is because of that.
Right.
Yep.
You can just be an idiot on it, and you're just like giggling and laughing the whole
Right.
time because you're going 7 miles an hour.
And it's like riding mini bikes, right? Phenomenal training tools, but it's also as close as we can get to like a foam ball pit for motorcycles.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So, and then Kawasaki, they have the Z400 and the Z650.
Z's are great bikes.
Yeah. I really like them too. I think 400, I think Kawasaki did a good job with that 400. It's a little peppier than.
It's got some more torque.
Yeah. It's a little more usable, but I would still think like for most people, I think the 600 is a little bit better bike. The MT-03 is on here, and then the SV650. I think everybody has to race an SV650 for some time in their riding career.
I avoided that.
And I did not.
I mean, it's a phenomenal bike. It's been around for 20 years unchanged for a reason. It's really hard to go wrong with that bike.
See, I would actually kind of steer people away from the SV650 because I think compared to the competition, it's dated. It doesn't it doesn't have some of the creature comforts and the functionality of some of the more modern brethren in that bike. So I think if on this list...
on that list, if I had to choose and, some of the other choices weren't available, I would choose that over, a 300cc.
Yes.
Well, all day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think the Z650 would probably be my first choice on this list.
MT-07 all day.
Or the MT-07. Yeah, I think between those two, they're really cool bikes.
Throw some heated grips on there, ride around all year.
Yeah. Well, and this is really cool. This is a new category that I didn't think they were actually logging for, but they're retro bikes. And I think retro bikes are awesome because they're naked bikes that look a little, if you're like kind of I like my Red Wings and my unwashed denim jeans, like the retro bikes are
like the XSRs.
Yeah, like the XSR. And actually, I think the Vitpillen belongs on that. I think that Vitpillen is so cool. Or the Svartpillen, same difference. Really fantastic. So they have like the CB350, it looks like it just rolled out of the 70s.
Yep.
The TU250, they use these for basic rider courses. It's a little too small, I think.
I think so.
Ducati Scrambler.
Those are actually, so we had a student yesterday on a Ducati Scrambler. I was kind of impressed by that bike.
I think it might be a little on the big side. We're getting into the higher horsepower range,
aren't
we?
Not really. Like it looked like a very manageable bike.
Yeah.
I haven't ridden one. So take that with a grain of salt. But from what I was seeing from a newer rider, like pretty manageable.
But they have the Yamaha SR400 on here, which I think that thing is really cool.
Yeah.
That's a cool little bike.
Pretty bikes.
And then the Trident 660, which I wasn't as familiar with this bike. It's a cool little triple that looks like a 1960s Triumph.
Speaking of 660s, one of the bikes that should have been on the last category is the Tuono 660.
Yeah, that's a bigger bike. That's a lot more power,
but
though.
It's also an expensive bike because it's an Aprilia.
I think it's arguably one of the prettiest bikes you can buy right now.
It's also got really good electronics, especially for a newer rider.
And it's under 400 pounds, which blows me away. Like that 660 is...
It's got a peppy engine, but it's peppy in the same kind of sense that the R7 and MT-07
Can you
is.
power mode it down a little bit? Because I think it's close to, isn't it like 100 horsepower on that?
The dash
660?
on that thing, you can do up and down on engine braking, your TC up and down, ABS up and down, the engine mapping up, like everything.
So
it's also about double the price of most of these.
Yes. True. And because it's an Aprilia, it can only be worked on by certain people. You have to be careful with that. So it's not that accessible.
So not the most friendly beginner bike. But in terms of...
If you have the money...
Buy once, cry once.
It's pretty. I love how they look. Those 660s, I think, are so good looking.
That bike will be one of those bikes that, you buy it once, it can do everything, and you'll never outgrow it.
I think Zach just did the Daily Rider on a 660, I think, recently, with different colored wheels. It looked good. It looked good. All right, and then the last class is the sport class.
No.
I don't think anybody should start off on a sport bike. I really don't. They're uncomfortable. They're too focused.
Yep.
The closest I would say...
You drop them, you're going to break something.
Yep.
And new riders are likely to drop them.
Oh, everybody has the side tank dent from dropping into a parking lot.
And breaking the bodywork or the
levers.
Levers.
Yeah.
Tough as a new rider to learn on a sport bike because...
Yep. I mean, they're uncomfortable.
They're uncomfortable. You're kind of locked into one riding style.
Yeah.
And if you decide you like touring, so I made this mistake. I started off, one of my first bikes was an FZR 600. And I wanted to tour.
You're effectively locking yourself into, I'm going to do this thing, even if I don't like it.
Yeah.
But I think as we wrap up our list of our best beginner bikes, I think something that if you just love the look of a certain style, go with that. Like if your heart is set on a sport bike, I would rather you be on a naked bike. But if your heart is set on a sport bike, get a sport bike.
There are some sport bikes that are actually fairly comfortable.
Right, like the Honda CB500, CBR500R, CBR 500.
CBR 500.
Yep.
CBR 500.
And then you've got like the R7.
The
So
R7.
Yamaha did an amazing
Yes.
job with the ergonomics on that. Like you can ride that pretty much all day as if it were an upright bike. You still got all the styling of the R6 and the R1.
Yep.
Yeah, the new RC390 is more committed. The seating position is
aggressive.
more aggressive than the older ones.
The Aprilia RS660 is also another sport bike that's fairly comfortable.
Very comfortable.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little more upright.
But please,
Ninja 400, I think, is a good one. That one's
It
a
is.
little.
It is.
It's not as aggressive.
not as aggressive, but it again doesn't have the power or the spunk to get you out of a situation.
Yeah.
And again, anything that's fully faired, as a new rider, you will drop it. You will.
You'll cry about it.
In a parking lot, it'll be getting gas,
And notice we say drop it, not crash it.
Right, big
Yes.
difference. There is a big difference.
Yes,
And
we
it's-
are expected to drop our bikes, but you don't have to crash. That's something I think people need to get in their heads, no matter if they're on the street or on the track. You don't have to crash.
I am so glad you said that, because I think that's a great way to kind of like wrap up. We always hear the new rider advice. You got it. I got it. There are those who have
And
and
those
those
who
who
will.
will.
Yep.
And
No.
I think that's crap.
Absolutely
you
not.
do not have to crash. You don't have to crash. All right, guys. So thank you so much for tuning in. This is our first one. If you liked it, let us know. If you have an idea for a name, let us know. We hope to continue doing these like throughout the winter. So I'm really glad that Alex and May came up with this idea. I think this was really fun.
It's her.
It was May. It was May's idea. So.
I mean, people like to talk motorcycles, so why not record it?
I know. It was funny. Like you were just like on the speakerphone in your truck and made that little comment. And I was like, oh.
Well, I think we did it enough times too, because like every race round, after race round,
As you're driving or
Yeah.
driving
Yeah.
back, you're like talking about it, like, what about this? And yeah, all right. Cool. Thanks everyone. And we'll see you next time or hear you next time. This is audio.